Um, I want people to understand that evolution has planted these, what I'll call biological algorithms in your brain. So there are things compelling you to act a certain way, feel a certain way all the time. And so working hard is one of those. You can understand from an evolutionary perspective why you would need to work hard. So you need to work hard, whatever you're doing. You're going to work hard to gain a set of skills that allow you to serve not only yourself, but other people.
Sure.
And as long as it's a set of skills that you find intrinsically interesting, so that your goal is exciting to you, that to me is the shortest recipe I can think of for what actually leads to the quote unquote good life.
Right.
Does that feel accurate?
That it is accurate. I would cover the other end of the evolutionary story. I have a section in the book on the mismatch hypothesis, which is an evolutionary principle that explains why, in some cases, we stray away from happiness or mental health or physical health, because it's also relevant to our existential happiness. So the mismatch hypothesis, Tom, is the idea that a behavior or a preference that might have been adaptive in our evolutionary past becomes maladaptive in the contemporary environment. So the classic example of that phenomenon would be our gustatory preferences. So we've evolved the preference for fatty foods. Now, you and I might have different preferences. I might like juicy steak. You might like chocolate mousse. But we probably both prefer those two foods or sources than, say, raw broccoli or tofu.
This is correct.
Right? And the reason for that is very simple, because your ancestors and mine evolved in an environment of caloric scarcity and caloric uncertainty. Therefore, it would have made sense for them to have evolved those preferences, which are then passed down. In today's environment, where there isn't caloric uncertainty or caloric scarcity, then we get some of the biggest killers, colon cancer and heart disease and high blood pressure and diabetes. Many of these are preventable based on the types of foods that we eat. So that's an example of the mismatch hypothesis in evolutionary medicine. But let's apply it, say, to how we live our lives in terms of social relationships. We've evolved, as you probably heard, the Dunbar number is something that the evolutionary anthropologist Robin Dunbar talked about, that roughly we've evolved with around 150 people around us in our evolutionary past. But then we have very tight relationships with these concentric groups of these 150 people. Social relationships are the most important thing to our happiness. As a matter of fact, I'll come back to Dunbar's number in a second. I quote in the book the main finding from 80 plus years of research at Harvard, longitudinally tracking people. The number one factor that describes how well you will feel later in life is the quality of your social relationships, even more so than your cholesterol levels. So don't worry about taking a statin to lower your LDL scores. Make sure that you have 2, 3, 4 friends that you really trust and love, and you can engage in reciprocal rituals with, right? And so Dunbar's number expects us to have these tight bonds. Now, I could live in New York surrounded by 8 million people, and yet I feel unbelievably alone, because I'm not instantiating any of those tight reciprocal bonds. So I am with 8 million people, and yet I'm incredibly lonely. And so one of the ways by which we can apply evolutionary principles to happiness is seeing some of these mismatches and how we can resolve that mismatch so that we can be happier.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so we know that we can become misaligned, but we also know that there are these programs running in our mind. One of them, so if we're going to use that shared definition, a big part of this is you have to know what's exciting to you. So we come back to know thyself. So how do you come to know yourself, and how do you deal with things like where your need, because you and I are very different. I am very much a pleaser. I'm not disagreeable at all. I would score very low on disagreeability. So how do you deal with when you have a thing to be authentic to yourself? You have to constantly face that. One, how do you come to recognize that? And how do you recognize the difference between a thing that you should embrace about yourself and something you should try to change about yourself?
Those are big questions. So let me give you an example of this kind of know thyself. Perfectionism, something that I regrettably suffer from. So in one of the chapters of the book, I talk about everything in moderation. So the sweet spot, which Aristotle had spoken about more than 2,000 years ago when he argued that, for example, a soldier who is too cowardly is not good. A soldier who's too reckless in his courage is not good. The best soldier is the one who is somewhere in the middle. And so what I argue in that chapter is everything in life amounts to finding the sweet spot in that domain. There is no law of nature that is more ubiquitous than the inverted U. Too little is not good, too much is not good. The right point is somewhere in the middle. So perfectionism, for example. If you're not in the least bit perfectionist, then let's say you're an author, then your work will suffer because you don't have any attention to details, right? You'll be sloppy. Your references will be poorly cited, right? If you are on the other end of the curve where I lie, which is when you receive the galley proofs of your book, instead of rejoicing that you're in the final step, you go into a complete full-blown panic attack because this is the last time that I will have a chance to pick up a typo or a comma that's out of place. I end up spending an inordinate amount of time rereading the book to catch that typo. Well, it would have made a lot more sense pragmatically to recognize that it's okay if there's a typo, and I could have spent those 2 weeks doing something a lot more productive that gives me a lot more bang for my buck. Well, but I have to have the humility and the introspection to be able to say, I suffer from perfectionism. What can I do to change it? So the old cliche is, the first step is to recognize that you have a problem, and you can only do that if you're truly humble within yourself. Same thing when I lost a lot of weight. I could have jumped on the Lizzo bandwagon and said, you are healthy at any size. Or I could have listened to my physician and to myself and to the mirror that said to me, you need to lose weight. People don't live to be 100 if they are 50, 60, 70 pounds overweight. So it takes honesty, it takes introspection, it takes authenticity, it takes humility. Put it all together. Hopefully you make the necessary change.